Okay, so today I want to look at the Rambam and the Raavad and the Kesef Mishneh. We sort of last week talked about marriage with maybe civil marriage or marriage without kiddushin. Now we're going to talk about the HaEzer of Pilegesh or the HaEzer of Pilegesh, which is a nice topic because it's interesting. It's you'll stay awake. So let's start with the Rambam. You can find it on my source sheet, but it's also we can just open up Hilchas Ishus, Perak Aleph, in the Rambam. That's in Sefer Nashim. Yavni, you have a good mic there. Actually, you know what? I like to always ask Gershon to read Rambam. Gershon, maybe you'll read the Rambam.
קודם מתן תורה היה אדם פוגע אישה בשוק, אם רצה הוא והיא לישא אותה, מכניסה לתוך ביתו ובועלה בינו לבין עצמו, ותהיה לו לאישה. כיוון שניתנה תורה, נצטוו ישראל שאם ירצה האיש לישא אישה, יקנה אותה תחילה בפני עדים, ואחר כך תהיה לו לאישה, שנאמר, כי ייקח איש אישה ובא אליה. So before Matan Torah, a man would just meet a woman in a shuk. If he wanted her, then the hili sa'ota, then he could take her and bring her into her house and have sexual congress between themselves, well, with themselves, obviously. And she would be considered as a wife, as if the act of bringing her into the house and engaging in sexual congress was enough to perform the status of having a wife. Since the Torah was given, the Torah commanded that if a man wants to marry a woman, he has to acquire her initially before Edim, and then she will be a wife to him in the full sense in order to fulfill the pasuk where it says ki kach ish isha uva eleha. So when a man takes a woman and then comes upon her.
Now, what would you say is the main difference? If you had to only pick one thing, well, first of all, if you had to pick two things, what would the two differences be between before and after Matan Torah? If you had to pick two things.
Kinyan and Edim.
Kinyan and Edim. And if you had to pick, go ahead, somebody. Yeah, Isaac?
All right, I want to add, like pre-Sinai, it says that both the man and the woman want it. And after Sinai, it just says that the man wants to marry her. I don't know. I prefer the pre-Sinai marriage. I don't want to get post-Sinai marriage. I don't want to be acquired. I don't want someone to not ask my opinion if I want to be married.
I don't think, first of all, you can't marry non-consensually. The woman has to, by accepting.
Well, that's not what the Rambam is saying here.
No, because
I agree with you generally, but
not that it's truly a purchase, but it is being compared to a purchase. It's not really a purchase. You don't own your wife, but it's compared to a purchase. And in a purchase, there are two sides. There's the buyer and the receiver of the money. So once we talk about it being a similar to being a purchase, so there's the initiator and there's the recipient. Whereas before it wasn't a purchase. So there was just a mutual agreement. There was nothing to do. There was no commerce going on. So it was just they had to agree. But now there's a purchaser and then the acceptor. So I think it's implicit. My point is, let me finish. I think my point is that it's implicit that there's acceptance by the woman. Just like there's if you want to buy a refrigerator, lahavdil, you go and give money. You want to do it, and then the seller has to also want to do it, obviously. He takes the money. By taking the money, he's accepting. But I agree with you, linguistically,
there's one problem with that. There's a problem with that analogy. There's a problem with that analogy as well. Within the Torah framework, the purchasing goes on, the father receives the money, not the bride. So the woman is being treated sort of as if she's an active.
That's only where she's
father's getting the money.
Adult. Only a ketana is incapable of making kinyanim. So her father only gets it when she's legally unable to.
I think that's
Yeah,
how the halacha developed. I'm saying within the
Asher's
Torah
making a
framework,
biblical
that's not how
comment.
it's.
Asher, you're making like a biblical comment. You're saying as you see it in the Torah,
Right, what we're
it
saying
seems
from
to be
Torah
the
time.
father is involved,
Yeah,
not a halachic comment. You're making a biblical comment.
right. Well, so I'm saying, so within the framework of what the Rambam is saying, he's saying from Sinai, it was done like this with a kinyan. And we have a kinyan within the Torah after Sinai, but the kinyan was with the father. And the Torah
I
doesn't
don't think he's
actually
saying that at
emphasize
all.
age.
I don't think he's saying that at all. I think it's entirely between two people.
Yeah, I wouldn't make too, I mean, Isaac, you made a good point about the language, but I don't think that that's the main message that the Rambam is giving here. That I think is obviously, I think the Rambam may be, it's so obvious to him that he didn't say it, but obviously there is agreement by the woman. But I think that the second issue is the Eidim. I think it's more different than after Torah. I mean, than before Torah. Before Torah, there were no Eidim, and now all of a sudden we have Eidim. What do we have before Matan Torah? What words did the Rambam use to describe it as opposed to Eidim?
Pogea isha bashuk.
They see each other, they like each other, they consummate.
No,
Beino
Levenat small. Beino Levenat small. I think the real contrast going in here, I mean, there are two, I'm not going to deny there are two things, but I think the main contrast is that first there was Beino Levenat small, and now it's in front of Eidim. That is the main thing that's going on. Obviously, there's some kind of agreement. It
was
could have
private.
been. It could have been before Matan Torah. They also gave money, but they could have if they wanted to. It wasn't required. But the Eidim, I think, is the main emphasis that he's saying here. And right, it was private. So there is an idea of a public commitment. There is an idea of a public commitment. Is my internet not good? You guys are hearing me?
You were glitching a little bit, but now you're okay.
Okay.
I hear you okay. I mean, if I could just, first of all, hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Hi, welcome Shana. Welcome Shana to our class. We're very happy
I
to have
mean,
you here.
really, thank you. But the Rambam
Wait,
is
how do we pronounce your first name?
it's Shana.
Shana. We're Ashkenazim here? Is that how we're doing it? Okay.
Or Shauna, you said.
Okay.
I was born in Rosh Hashanah. But he's the first part, Kodem Matan Torah, he's really describing Nisuin. Mean two people are living together, and that's the Rambam. That's how he defines a chuppah or Nisuin, doing the yichud, where the man brings the woman into his reshut. I mean, that's a chuppah. And when he's describing after Matan Torah, the Chiddush of the Torah is doing Kiddushin, i.e., I mean, it's the Eidim, it's the Kinyan, it's the ritual that makes it a Jewish practice. So it's the two-step process to getting married that he seems to be.
So you're saying that I think what you're saying is that the second part is like is the first event that happens. And
right.
then there is
it's
still
makes it uniquely Jewish. I mean, everyone, all people, a Kodem Matan Torah, they want to live together, and that's what they do. So the Torah added really a religious ritual to it.
Well, but I'm asking, why does he say Beino Levenat Smo? He could have just written Uboela v'tielo isha. What do we care? I mean, what is Beino Levenat Smo? Is that referring to the Boela or the whole procedure? And I think it's the whole procedure. And I think he's I think that he's saying that they used to do it. It could have been a private matter. We don't allow it. When the Rambam talks about the laws of requiring a minyan, he says the reason why we need a minyan and a chuppah, 10 men, is to make it public so that people won't do it too often. People could marry and then a week later marry somebody else, divorce and marry and divorce. And he wants it to be a public expression, kind of to embarrass people, to prevent them from doing it too often. And I think that here he's I think that here he's contrasting it with the privacy from before. You were saying is also true that the privacy still occurs. We still have a yichud. We still have the yichud. Okay, but anyway, I think that's interesting because we're going to see that same language in the Shulchan Aruch. It says if he gets married, beino levein atzma, then it's not valid.
Rav Nachum?
Yeah.
This is maybe a different look at it. It's not necessarily contradictory to the other ones, but I think the Rambam is describing in some ways of bringing marriage into the regime of legality, of law, right? That before, that what does law need? It needs testimony, and it needs some sort of contractual piece to it, right? Which Kiddushin is a contractual piece where, there's actually like legal ramifications happen once Kiddushin is done, with a physical action to it. And so really it's like before that law, marriage existed completely outside of the law. There was no legal ramifications. It wasn't seemingly something you could ever, judge in court, have the courts take on any issues of it. And the Rambam says the Torah moves it into a world of law, essentially. It needs witnesses and it needs a kinyan, something that's, contractual.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. He's right. It's much less casual. It's a legal event. If you had to say, is it a mitzvah aseh or a mitzvah lota? If a person doesn't do this, what is he violating? Is he violating, or is he violating anything? It says, "Keivan shenitzavu Torah, keivan shenitna Torah, nitzavu Yisrael sheim yitz." So if a person doesn't do this, what is he violating?
I mean, in the next halacha, it says that it's a mitzvah taseh.
Right.
Cheating.
So let's read the next halacha. Go ahead, Gary. In other words, he's just but that's an important point. He's just violating a positive commandment. He's not doing a positive commandment. We'll see that there may be also a negative commandment. If you look at the list at the top of the Rambam in the actual book, it lists as halacha bet as mitzvah bet shelo tival isha below ketubah b'kiddushin. So the Rambam actually considers there to be two mitzvot. One, a mitzvah aseh and a mitzvah lo taseh. And if you don't get married with kiddushin, you violated two. You violated a aseh and a lo taseh.
I would just say it bears us keeping in mind the definitions and form of likuchin, first word of bet, that we will see in the course of not just the Siman of Shulchan Aruch where we are now, but that will continue how that will be. But at the very least, in terms of what you said, Nachum, I'm compelled to agree with you in the sense that kinyan always has an agreement of two in terms of all other halachas of kinyan. In other words, there's a lot to say about kinyan. There's a lot to say about Isaac's, or a lot to bear in mind Isaac's reaction to it. But I'll just say one thing that's true is all kinyanim are, unless it's a top. Well, I would say all kinyanim that involve individuals involves the notion of consent. That's that sense they are the same. There may be other problematics, but we'll have to see them. Okay, sorry for interrupting.
No, thank you. All right, Gary, go on.
לקוחין אלו מצוות עשה שתורה הם. ואחד בשלושה דברים אלו האישה נקנית, בכסף ובשטר ובביאה. בביאה ובשטר מהתורה, בכסף מדברי סופרים. לקוחים אלו הן הנקראים, קידושין או ארוסין בכל מקום. אישה שנקנת באחד מגימל דברים אלו, הן נקראת מקודשת ומאורסת.
So there are three ways you can get married, and he says the third one with Kesef is Kesef is divrei sofrim. All the commentaries jump on this. What is divrei sofrim? Just to give you the punchline, the general understanding is that divrei sofrim just means it's not explicitly written in the Torah, but it's the rabbis have derived it. But even though it has a deraita status, but it's a less clear form, it's less so explicit in the Torah. Although that's but you could argue that because, well, whatever. Nobody really thinks that the Rambam is holding us to the Rabbanan. But because that would cause all kinds of weird
No,
situations.
but you do. Avram ben Rambam gets rid of one being Divrei Sofrim. In other words, he says the nusach of his father was to have all three, and then there are other early Rishonim who want to say this, and I'm not saying it that they're right. I'm just saying this that they see the problem, and one way of taking care of it is to discover a better nusach in the Rambam.
But
Then
again,
the
this
other
is-
way, because what?
Thank you. But no, sorry, go ahead.
Then
a better
that's
nusach.
enough.
You know, really,
Quote
yeah.
unquote, a better nusach in which you don't have that problem, because the other situation is that shtar also is derived from is really a divrei sofrim according to that definition as well.
Right.
So in other words, it's not something that's an umdana that's just apparent. It's not apparent.
You're
Okay.
right. You're right. You're right. It's a problem with what I said. That shtar is also not clear in the Torah. Anyway, but we're not having a share on the Rambam so much. So I want to get to Halacha Dalet. Let's keep going. So Gary, go ahead.
We'll do Gimel first.
Yeah, do Gimel.
כיוון שנקנית האישה ונעשית מקודשת, אף על פי שלא נבעלה ולא נכנסה לבית בעלה, הרי היא אשת איש. ובא עליה חוץ מבעלה חייב מיתת בית דין. אם רצה לגרש, צריכה גט. So if she's acquired, כיוון שנקנית האישה, since she's acquired ונעשית מקודשת, she brings it to the realm of being מקודשת, אף על פי שלא נבעלה, even if she had no sexual congress, ולא נכנסה לבית בעלה, she doesn't enter the husband's domain, הרי היא אשת איש לכל דבר, but she's still considered a wife in the fullest sense, so all the legal ramifications of הבא אליה חוץ מבעלה, anyone who comes upon her or has sexual congress with her aside from her husband is chayav mitat beit din, and to the basically to the whatever we're defining mitat beit din. If he wants a get, if he wants to separate from her, he needs to provide her with a get, which is clearly a deal right, because that's
So actually, this, if you think about this sensitively, I think it does support what Shana was saying, that he's emphasizing here that this kiddushin supersedes the previous type of marriage. In other words, even though you might think, well, you still need to bring her into your house, that's true, but really this is done. You have married her, and therefore all the consequences are, in fact, our tofes, our relevant, our apply here, even though you haven't done the final bringing her into the house. So then he's showing that this new form, this new Torah form of marriage is superseded the other form to the extent that you don't even need the other form. You don't even need the just bringing into your house.
Well, I mean, you still need, he would still say you need to come plead the Nia Suin. There's very interesting Ramban on this, that he says the mitzvah begins at Kiddushin and it only ends with Nia Suin. And that's why we have such a weird bracha for Kiddushin. So even the Rambam would say that. I mean, the Gemara already says that you don't do Kiddushay Bia because they're a priesthood, so they don't live together yet. So I mean, this is the Mishneh. You're in like a quasi state that she's an Eshet Ish in some regards, but they don't live together. So it's not a complete. It's not done. They're not fully married. They don't live together yet. But
he's not saying that.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because in the second halacha, it says the three ways that she's niknet is either the kesef or the shtar or the via.
Right, no, right. It's one of three ways. That's the first mission of Kiddushin. It's not the Rambam's opinion, but it says in the Bavli that we don't do Kiddushay Bia anymore except for in Yehuza because it's their priesthood. And even if had they done Kiddushay Bia, they would not sleep together again until the Suin occurred.
There's the Rambam, right?
So no one would say they're fully married. They need a get. I mean, she needs a get. Everyone agrees. That's why we don't do kiddushin and the sue in a year apart
She's not
anymore.
fully.
What halachic
What would a
language do you have
halachic not
fully
be
But
married?
why would it say Hari Eshet Ish and he'd be Chayav Mitat Beit Din? I mean, that seems
Because
a little
she
bit
is chayav a beit. She is a chayav
right.
a beit din.
So because it's in
Because
public
she's an
forum,
Ashes Ish in that regard, if
Yeah,
she
but
was to
this-
sleep with
that's the entire
anyone else.
point. The point is this was done in the Sibur, so it takes on the status of having just as much relevance.
Right,
even
but it's
though there was
only in
no
a way
idea.
that, but it's only in the way that hurts her. He doesn't have to support her,
Yes, he does.
you know, I mean, it's only, I mean, what.
Well, she doesn't eat truma. If he's here, let me help you out, Sean.
No,
If he's a
okay,
Kohen,
if he's a Kohen, Min HaTorah, she can eat a truma, but Mizra Banan she does. I mean, the Gemara says that she doesn't. She has some quasi rights, but they're not fully married. I mean, they don't live together. That's what Nia Suin or a chuppah is. He brings her and he brings her into his reshut in a yichud room. The Rambam says he needs to maybe own the place where yichud occurs, and then they live together as husband and wife. At this point, they're not fully married, and the Eshet Ish is in regard to haba aleha. Like she would be chayav. I mean, before if she slept with some other guy, she's frutza. Now she's chayav mita. So, I mean,
Yeah, because
But
if
again,
she
I
was
think that- I think that
Harus,
it's-
then she'd be
right,
Chayav.
because it's erusin. I
So
mean,
the question
it
is-
something.
the
It's
question is,
betrothal.
what is the Rambam trying to emphasize? Why is he not mentioning here anything about nisuin? Why doesn't he say she still has to do nisuin? And what is his emphasis? I think his emphasis is to push back against the previous pre-Torah method and to say how significant this is. Whereas to the eyes of the pre-Torah person, he would say, what did you do? You just gave her a pruta and now something changed? Everybody knows you need to bring her into your house and bola, and then she's married, but now you didn't do anything. So he's trying to emphasize that no, this seemingly legalistic act, which doesn't look at all like they're a married couple, but they are. And maybe you're right; they're not fully married, but he's trying to say that just to demonstrate the change that happened between Matan Torah and before Matan Torah.
If they're not fully married, what's the difference between the two?
They don't live
Difference
together.
between what two?
No, but I mean, there's no legal definition of difference between this and the state of him bringing into that. Doesn't he's still hired by Shakes Sutva or not? He still has to.
No, not until they're married. He doesn't support her until the chuppah takes place. And in the beginning of Masechet Ketubot, it talks about, so if the wedding was pushed off, if it's her fault, he doesn't have to support her. If it's or she's sick versus he's sick, so he doesn't have to financially support her. He doesn't support her yet. They're living
But
as
she
separate lives.
she does collect the ketubah if he conks, if he dies during this period. So, I mean, it's not complete.
Is it possible to connect it to-
This will find its interest in those cases in which there's arison and then the wedding is delayed, really delayed, and so that will be really what happens with her. We're going to get to that actually in the halacha, not today. Yeah.
I'm curious if this is also connected to the-
Usher, one second. Sarah's been.
sorry.
having her go off.
Sorry.
Do a little
Sarah,
comment.
there's also
whatever. I
Yavli.
should be more
Also
forceful.
Yavli.
I guess back to what Rav Nachum was saying a minute ago about the Rambam sort of emphasis. It seems like if the Rambam wanted to emphasize the difference between the pre-Matan Torah model and the post-Matan Torah model, he would lean harder on the like ritual parts of Nisuin. Like, it seems like he could say she's like kala v'lo bracha, you're not supposed to, she's not supposed to have sex, all here and all the other things that go with that, but he doesn't do that here. So I'm wondering whether he just doesn't think of those like brachot and the like ritual kind of trappings of Nisuin as important as the legal part. And in fact, like Dafka, what he's interested in is the legal part. I don't know. It just seems like it doesn't, at least in I know,
He's
I was
trying
gonna
to give
look
you the
back through the
minimum-
other thing to see where he mentions it, but in the initial presentation, the ritual parts of Nisuin that we think of as Nisuin are not as important to him as legal formalization of Kiddushin.
Well, I mean, I think we're in Hilchos Ishus, and he's interested in, who's forbidden and who's permitted, and we're looking for the minimum of actions that are going to make a woman forbidden to other people, and so therefore, other parts of the tekes are stripped away because they're
But
not
it seems like
relevant.
we should also be interested in like what would make her permitted to somebody,
Again,
Right?
Oh,
Well, I guess.
no,
Yeah,
but you're saying,
but
or
it
to the
seems like
husband.
one thing he could say, like I'm imagining a version of this parak where he says, okay, like first there's like right after, I don't know, is it halacha gimel where he says like this is what,
Well, he
no,
says,
halacha bet where he says like this is what erusin is, and she needs a get, and if you have sex with her, if she has sex with someone else, she's chayim mita, the whole thing. And then next thing, okay, how do we get beyond that stage? The following 3 steps, whatever, like spell it out.
doesn't
He doesn't do that.
Sefer HaMitzvot. He lists Kiddushin and Nisuin as two
Separately.
separate mitzvot, and he defines how each one would be done. So
Right. So I don't know if maybe that also points to some like the pre-Matan Torah, post-Matan Torah split is like defined more by the legal piece than the ritual piece or something like that. And like the ritual piece is like some other thing.
What's a ritual
If
piece?
it's fair to divide between like Kiddushin as legal and Nisuin as ritual.
What's a
maybe it's
ritual?
unfair.
What's a ritual
isn't a
piece?
Kiddushin a ritual?
I mean, it's a ritual, but it's also like, I don't know, I guess I think of it as more legal because it's like less about the brachot and more about like affecting a change of some kind of change of ownership.
versus
legal state.
versus chuppah, which chuppah, whatever that is,
Chuppah, which seems like it's
Chuppah's the yichud, that's so much less. I mean,
it's
well,
well,
no,
it's not so clear what chuppah is, right? That's gonna be
Yeah,
the
I mean,
whole
I
thing,
think
right? Chuppah is
I remain very confused
Yeah.
about what chuppah is in each.
well,
Like
for
let's-
Rambam, it's the yichud.
I will just tell you that when a beis din has a problem, because we have to somehow I'm speaking we, meaning when I used to be in a beis din, we have to somehow be mevatel the marriage. One of the things that aids us is to say there was no birchas nisuin. Therefore, that the chuppah was merely a sukkah that someone put up. And in other words, we look for things. So clearly that's a stretch, but it still has to do with need for the formalism. So therefore, even even the rituals could have a legal sense.
I mean, let's just took
I give you that as testimony.
I wasn't intending to talk about this, but just since this is an interesting topic, let's just jump quickly for a peek at Hilchos Ishus in the Rambam, chapter 10. If you have a Rambam available, or electronic, or paper,
Mm-hmm.
you guys are there.
Which halacha?
The first halacha on Perek Asiri. So he says like this: Ha'arusa asura le'ba'ala b'divrei sofrim. So this arusa that we just talked about is forbidden from the divrei sofrim. Kol zman shehi bebeit aviha. V'abala al arusato bebeit chamav. Makinoto makat mardu. It's rabbinic prohibition. You get punished. V'afilu im kidsha b'bia asura lo. This is what Shana was saying. Asura lo levo aleha bia shnia bebeit avia ad sheyavi ota letoch beito. Still has to do another ceremony of bringing her into his house. V'yit yached ima v'yifrishenu lo. V'yichud zehu anikra knisa lechuppah. And this bringing into the house is called chuppah, bringing into the chuppah. V'hu anikra nisuin b'kol makom. And that's what we call marriage. V'haba al arusato l'shem nisuin achar shekitshe Mishiyaraba kana. So even a small sexual relation can cause acquisition. v'naset nesua v'harehi ishto v'kol davar. So there is this other aspect, which the Rambam talks about. I'm just saying there. We didn't here. It said. Did he say here? Here it says naset nesua harehi ishto l'kol davar. What language is used by us?
Eshet ish.
Eshet ish. Harehi eshet ish.
Right, but
So,
that exactly
that's-
supports what Shauna was saying.
Yeah, that's what Shauna was saying. I think, yeah. In other words, now we're just talking about Isser. That's also what I was saying. We're talking about, like, now she's Eshet Ish. You can be over the Avera of being with an Eshet Ish, but she's not yet fully married to you. And that's what we're going to discuss, the Rambam is going to discuss in chapter 10, but we're not going to discuss it now.
The first
Maybe
one
that-
changes her status, and the second one changes the status of their relationship.
I would even say different. I would say
Also, the first one is
changes,
Deoraita, and the second one is Derabanan, it seems like.
I would say the first one changes her status klape chutz.
No, he thinks they are both deoraita. He counts them as two separate mitzvot.
But I think the first one forbids her from other people. And the second one, the Nisuin, permits her to you. Now, this first you do an act where you,
No, but he says it's only midrabanan that they are not.
so
allowed
what,
to
so you're saying,
be
what is
together.
the status of the Deraita then? You're permitted to her,
They're
well, because,
both deoraita. I mean, they're both, according to the Rambam, both Kedushin and Nisuin are deoraita. Not everyone agrees with that, but that's
But
the
I'm saying-
Rambam's view. And they're two separate mitzvot because he counts them as two separate mitzvot. What are they? Kedushin is-
Shalanu esa arusa sehiter lanu esa nesuos.
That's rabbinic.
That's what.
Well,
the
that's
ritual
what
is
the
making
Ramban
it's
says.
making the law pretty obvious. Yeah.
Well, the Rambam's sons, Rav Avram ben Harambam, says what his father meant is that the mitzvah ends at Niyasuin. So,
well, the question is what well, I don't want to discuss it today, but obviously there's going to be some Deraita status that it applies to the woman. Logically, there should be a Deraita status. Not,
she needs to get.
No, but she needed to get before.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, sorry, she needs to get from Kedushin.
From Kiddushin, she already is forbidden. You get murder. You will execute somebody for sleeping with her, and you will require a get already a Kiddushin, and she's now forbidden to everybody, and she's permitted midoraita to the husband, but forbidden to the husband midorabanan. What does the nisuin do on a doraita level? In other words, it's got to be some other doraita status that applies to her only after nisuin, and it's not that now he's permitted to be with her because that's only dorabanan. So we have to think about that, but that's not the subject of our shiur today. So I don't want to talk about it anymore. But there has to be, if it's another doraita, there has to be another doraita status that she is getting, which would be interesting to think about what it is. But we're not going to talk about that today because I didn't give you sources about that. Let's go on to David. Yes.
Wait, I had a question though before we move on. I'm sorry. I'm wondering if the whole status we're talking about is connected to the whole idea of the word of mikudeshet. Right? Kiddushin, the word kadosh actually means separate. The fact that the Rambam is saying it's called either kiddushin or erusin means he's using the terms interchangeably. Erusin and kiddushin for him are the exact same thing, apparently, according to halacha bet. And if that's the case, then technically she is legally, halachically set aside.
Yes, for sure.
Right. So that and so
that's why we're going to execute somebody for sleeping with her.
Right, but that's also, I think, it helps explain the whole, all the questions with the status, or why is it like this? And I mean, it's confusing for us because I think somebody mentioned earlier, I don't remember, I think it may have been Shana, about how, today, Erusin and Kiddushin, we do it, they're within 2 minutes of each other, which is different than what was at the time. And so we're approaching this with, understanding Erusin Kiddushin the way we know it today, and that's not the way it was. But the fact that she's already mikudeshet, and she's mikudeshet either from one of three ways, and it doesn't have to be all three of them, but any of the three ways, she's already mikudeshet. To me, the concept of Mikudeshet means Eshet Ish. Whether they've
Really?
consummated, whether they finished everything else or not, that is the Eshet Ish.
That's the Gemara in Ki Adushin says. Why is this language of Ki Adushin? You're right, because Asurila Akule Ama Kehek Adesh. She's like something sanctified for the temple, i.e., it can't be used for anything else. So she's not, she's kind of like she's designated.
Designated.
For
That's
him.
actually exactly. I prefer that word for kiddushin to say
Right,
designated.
and that's what it is. So anyone else. So now, before she was a minor, only her father will know her vows. Now, the man and her father will. Again, like if he's a Kohen, technically she can eat his truma. She can't.
Well, it is an interesting
sleep
question.
with anyone else,
It's-
but they don't live
Nachum,
together.
I think I put my
going to
finger on a
have
really
to
good
turn-
question, which is what new status does she gain from a Torah level once she does the Nisuin?
They live together. I mean,
But
that's
that's not a
now
halachic
living together
status.
as
Yeah,
husband
right,
and wife.
No, but that's a behavior. That's not a category. That's not a halachic category. She doesn't fall into a new category that different halachot apply to her.
Maybe there
that-
isn't.
And if it
there-
isn't, then it's weird. It's just very weird that there is such a requirement to
I
do
think,
nisuin if it doesn't change anything in any.
I think that's what the Rambam's getting at, saying everyone has niyaskuin. That's what was pre-Matan Torah. Torah didn't innovate that. That's human marriages. Torah added doing a ritual or a legalistic part to it, whatever we want to
Earlier,
call it.
beforehand.
And that's the chiddush of the Torah doing kiddushin, which precedes just two people moving in together and supporting.
Which, by the way,
each other.
explains a really interesting question, which is, marriage must exist by goyim also, because
Well,
because there's
it
such
does. And by the way, like the Rambam, I mean,
Sinai.
when does the Rambam ever write? Pre-Matan Torah, people didn't eat a kosher food. I mean, he doesn't
right,
generally say what they did before Matan Torah.
because he's trying to
Why
say
is he adding
that
this?
because that pre-Torah concept still exists in halacha. Really.
Yeah, and everyone has, and everyone does have it. All peoples have.
Right,
Wait,
and
sorry,
that's a
Nachum,
halachic
why does it still
significance
exist
in the sense that
Torah?
a goy who sleeps with a woman of another man is punishable by execution. So there must be such a thing as a marriage. In others, in our Jewish minds, we have a concept that a goy married is different. A goy sleeps with a married woman is different from a goy sleeps with a not married woman. Among the goyim. So there is this marriage that's a real concept. It actually has halachic significance because, when we think about common law marriage, is there such a thing as marriage where you don't believe in Judaism? And the answer, and of course there is, right? All right,
But
let's go on.
I'm just raising my objection to using the word miyachet, to saying kiddushin is selection, because we're going to have a whole thing of being miyachet, which is selection. Kiddushin is beyond selection, or is much stronger than selection. You'll see it. I mean, you'll have a problem
by
if you make
Pilegesh,
it as an equivalence. You'll have the notion of yichud without kiddushin. You can
All right,
select someone or designate that you're together, but there's no kiddushin.
Let's go on to halacha daled. Gary. But yeah, there you go.
קודם מתן תורה, היה אדם פוגע אישה בשוק. אם רצה הוא והיא נותן לה שכרה ובועל אותה, על אם הדרך והולך. בזה היא הנקראת קדשה. בשני התורה נאסרה הקדשה שנאמר, לא תהיה קדשה מבנות ישראל. לפיכך כל הבועל אישה לשם זנות ולא קידושין לוקה מן התורה לפי שבעל קדשה.
Okay. So before Matan Torah, you could meet a woman in the shuk, and if you agree upon a certain price, you could have relations with her and go on your way. And this would be called a kadesha. But the Torah came and forbid that, because it says lo tiye kadesha avanot Yisrael, and therefore call a boel isha l'shem znut, anyone who has relations with a woman for the purpose of znut, In other words, well, below Kiddushin, without being married to her, lokim in a Torah, lefisha Baal Kadesha. Now, what bothers me about this Rambam, before we get anywhere, is what is this lefichach? He doesn't he describe two different things? The first thing he describes is a woman, and if I can use language, which we'll see, which the Rambam actually himself uses in Isurei Bia, he calls a kadesha mufkeret lakol. She's available to everyone, and that's what he seems to be describing in the first half, before the word lefichach. You meet her on the, you agree on a price and you go your way, and now she could be with somebody else. She's available to all. And then he says, Leficha kol boil isha l'shem znut below kiddushin. It sounds like what he's saying is, therefore, any type of marital relations that is not in the context of marriage is, below anything that is below kiddushin,
Right.
is located in the Torah because that's called a kadesha. Well, wait a minute. Maybe it's not maybe a kadesha. Maybe it's not a kadesha. Maybe it's a woman that is designated for you, but you just didn't do what the Rambam said with two adim and doing a purchase. You just agreed upon living together for 10 years, and why should that be called a kadesha? It's very different. Now, it's his description. And then he comes with lefichach, which is not consequent upon the previous description. What do you guys think about that?
Maybe the Raavad comes to make the difference that you say, that he makes the difference between a mezumenet and a meyachedet.
Yeah,
and that's the way.
The Raavad does make that distinction, but I'm just saying the Rambam seems to make a little bit of a jump here, a logical non sequitur. Like the logic doesn't fit.
And that's right. I mean, the logic fits if you really don't make a distinction between the two. So
in his mind,
right. So you have to say that the first story and the second story he tells about Kodem Matan Torah are effectively equivalent. And first he was talking about the mitzvah taseh, and then he talked about the mitzvah lo taseh. But I agree that it doesn't seem like he doesn't tell the same story.
Right. Therefore he says all boel of an isha l'shem znut. Well, what does he add the word l'shem znut for? Why does he just say lefichach kol boel isha below kiddushin loke? Why does he add the word l'shem znut?
Was her schara.
What?
Now we're talking about an exchange of money. I mean, there is a fundamental difference between the two stories.
We talked about that before in the first half as well. Noten l'schara.
No, not in the. Not in.
So my
the,
division is at the word lefichach. So the first half he does discuss money, and the second half he just says l'shem znut. So you're saying that's equivalent, maybe?
I was saying that the equivalent is znut has now become money instead of just whatever we were saying before, relations.
Well, that's another. No, I was saying it's another difference, right? In the beginning, it was money, and now there's no money. You're just doing it for free, and it's also called kadesha. What pitom? Why? What's the logical step here? Maybe the Rambam. I mean, I haven't. This is not what I was intending to really talk about, but we could fit it if the Rambam means something slightly different. He might mean leficha kol boel isha. He would like to write kol haboel isha l'shem znut loke min Torah, and he adds actually parenthetically below kiddushin, which would be a kind of weird read, but it's saying like if there could be a possibility of having znut even in marriage. And he's trying to say that would be permitted. I don't know.
If you were boil l'shem znut, but you did do kiddushin, it would be okay.
Yeah, I guess. In other words, but that doesn't make sense. So l'shem znut seems to be the opposite of kiddushin. In other words, the Rambam views it as a binary world. Either it's kiddushin or it's not Kiddushin. And once it's not Kiddushin, it's Znut. And therefore, that whether it's the Kadesha, the classic Kadesha of Mufkeret Lakol, or any type of relations that's not Znut, that's not the Kiddushin, it's Znut. There's only two possibilities, either Znut or Kiddushin. And therefore, once we have this as being Usser, it must be the whole category. Once we say Kadesha of this, modern day prostitute is forbidden, then anything that's not Kiddushin is going to be forbidden, because that's only one category. Things that are not Kiddushin, things that are Kiddushin.
So Nachum, it does two things. One is you just said, which I agree with completely. It's a binary situation, and therefore below Kiddushin is to explain, but it raises the whole notion of Kiddushin. And it goes back to the whole legal notion. If you don't do Kiddushin, which is the legal way, the legal form of doing it, then everything is Znut. It's not, it's not,
right.
It's not just it's not just you have one or the other, is that you have to have it because the consequence then is catastrophic. In terms, there's nothing in between. We'll see an in between thing, but there's nothing there. I'm sorry, I think Sarah was going to speak.
Oh, Sarah wants to speak. Go ahead, Sarah.
Oh no, I was going to say something, but it was wrong, so it's okay.
I thought I also say wrong things. We're all family here. But the end, I think no. So I think what is he doing? I think he's doing really something. He's trying to persuade you. He's really trying to hammer home this idea that you need to do Kiddushin. He's now telling you there's a Kadesha, and you wouldn't want to do that, would you? No. And he says, well, guess what? We have Kiddushin, and anything that's not Kiddushin, I'm saying it's Kiddushin. So therefore, any Znut is like Kadesha. He's manipulating your thoughts. He's equating things. He's saying like A equals B, B equals C. He's trying to put in your mind first, this first part of it is very acceptable. You could very likely say, yeah, that's a Kadesha. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. And then he says, and then he comes with this with the punchline, and anything that's not, once he's got you on board and his way of thinking, he then comes and says, and anything that's not Kiddushin is Znut, actually. So he's trying to convince you of the importance of Kiddushin, and I'm not doing anything without Kiddushin. So I think it's like a persuasive approach.
But wouldn't it be more persuasive if he admitted the words l'shem znut? Right? If he just said, okay, in the Torah, there's this thing that's an isur, there's Kadesha, you're not, that's a serious isur. Therefore, anyone who who sleeps with a woman, velo Kiddushin, lo kemina Torah, for the following reason, doesn't include this extra proviso.
No, he's trying to tell you he's trying to tell you, don't kid yourself. It is Znut. If it's not the Kiddushin, he's trying to tell you this binary reality, that if it's not Kiddushin, I'm also telling you something that what you thought was maybe not so bad, I'm calling it Znut. He wants to call it Znut intentionally to persuade you away from it. I mean, the Rambam in general is ascetic, so it fits to his worldview.
In fact, I was just going to add,
you shouldn't.
He's like, not only does he think
like the least amount of sex you need.
I mean, he thinks any kind of kirvala arayot, like intimate touching, like holding hands, is an isser deoraita. So
the Rambam, you can always remember who holds what. The Rambam and the Ramban.
Rambam.
Right, the Rambam. You can always remember who holds which opinion with the Rambam and the Ramban.
Right.
And because the Rambam is always the ascetic. Whenever there's a question, the Rambam is always more. He's on the side of asceticism. By the way, I mean, I don't want to say any epicursis, but I would say it's because the Rambam was such an avid student of the Aristotle. Aristotle refers to the sense of touch as being the ganai, the disgraceful aspect of the commonality between the human and the animal is the pleasure involved with touch. So it's a kind of it fits, at least. I wouldn't say necessarily he was influenced, but I'll leave that to you. But it fits his approach. It fits to Aristotle. Is what I want to say. Rev Landis, you don't like what I'm saying.
Well, either I don't like what you're saying or I don't like the attribution. I mean, the Rambam here is not, this is this is all legal stuff. You can't do it both ways, I think. This is all, but it's legality. It's legality. Also, I say is you got to read it Jewishly. Call Bal Yishol Shem Zanus, which is below Kiddushin.
Which is below Kiddushin. Agree.
Which
All right,
is
let's see.
below
So the
Kiddushin.
Raavad,
Can I attempt to save the logic of it by making it very legalistic?
Good.
I think sort of what you were saying, Nachum, about putting parentheses there. I think you could say, like, before Matan Torah, there were two different ways that sexual relations happens. One is like people would meet in the shuk and they would, get effectively married, and the other was that there would be znut. And maybe Rambam is saying like znut is really not allowed, but then he feels the need to put in an asterisk and say like, actually, I could imagine, like, what does znut mean as opposed to l'shem ishut? It's like that it's something temporary. Like the two differences between the pre-Matan Torah stories that we have are the payment of money and the temporariness of it, that he then goes on his way. So maybe he's saying like, actually, maybe you could still have a l'shem znut, i.e. you only intend it to be temporary and you intend to pay money for it if you go through the legal loophole of actually doing kiddushin first. And so that's why he has to put in that proviso of below kiddushin, because otherwise l'shem znut, we can't actually legally look at you mina Torah because maybe that's legal. And it doesn't count as a kadesha.
are you saying with the woman with
Forced.
money? You're
I don't
saying?
know that I buy it that it's actually, but like in order to save the logic, I'm offering it as a proposal.
I mean, the read that it's interesting, very interesting what you're saying. Let me offer another reading. The reading that if somebody wanted to defend, there are those that say the Rambam actually does not forbid a prostitute unless she's mufkeret lakol. And then you could read it a little bit differently, and you could say, lefichach kol aboel isha l'shem znut u below kiddushin. In other words, you need two things. It has to be, well, in other words,
Correct.
No, I take it back. I was trying to say that maybe you could have a relationship that was with, right, because of Pilegesh.
And that way, if you do something
there's a machlokas of whether the Rambam holds that a Pilegesh requires kiddushin. So some hold that the Rambam holds that the Pilegesh requires kiddushin, but that would still be forbidden maybe to a non-king. So it could be then it would be znut with the kiddushin.
So this saves the possibility of having a Pilegesh, i.e. a pre-Matan Torah marriage that does not count as transgressing on the Isur Kedesha, but still doesn't include Kiddushin, and therefore transgresses the mitzvah aseh that he talks about in the first part.
All right, well, very good. Thank you. That's very interesting. I think about that more. But let's go on to the Raavad. Maybe you want to read us the Raavad.
Sure. קודם מתן תורה וכולי. אני אומר, אין קדשה אלא מזומנת והיא מופקרת לכל אדם. אבל היא מייחדת עצמה לאיש אחד, אין בה לא מלכות ולא איסור לאו, והיא הפילגש הכתובה בפסוק. ובעלי הלשון, do you want me to do the rest? ובעלי לשון דורשים פילגש.
בעלי לשון you can skip.
Yeah. ויש סוברים שכתוב בהם פילגשים.
לא, ויש ספרים
שכתוב בהם פילגשים בלי קידושין. עד כאן לשונו.
Right. פילגשים בלי קידושין. פילגשים קידושין בלא כתובה is the correct length. I have in the Frankel he writes it like that.
Okay.
פילגשים קידושין בלא כתובה. Pilegesh is with Kiddushin, but without a ketubah. And there's actually a Yerushalmi that supports that opinion. Mikol Makom, go ahead. Whatever a Pilegesh is, when he's saying this Mikol Makom, whatever a Pilegesh is, Mikol Makom, go ahead.
That's all I have for the right there.
So it goes on. Mikol Makom, Ein Isur Lav El B'Mizamenet Atzma L'Kol Adam. The only lav is if she makes herself available to everyone. She'im kidvarav, and he says like this, because, and this is an interesting point he makes. She'im kidvarav, if it would be like he says, that any Panui who comes on a Panuya is a Kadesha, is Isser. Mifateh hech mishalem alea mamon. Bahalo loke aleha. We have a rule: if you're not going to pay money if you get whipped, and if it was if he's mifateh a woman and sleeps with her, and that's called an Isser Lav of Kadesha. So he did an Isser Lav, you're not going to also make him pay a Knas. How can you have a Knas? It must be from the idea of Mifateh that there's that a Panui who comes on a Panuya is not an Isser of Kadesha. Elavadai Mishahut Srachali Pitui Eino Kadesha. Since he needed to persuade her, he needed to, convince her to go along with this. So she was not making herself available to everybody. She didn't want to, and he persuaded her. Ain't no Kadesha. She is therefore not considered a Kadesha.
Pitui has to be a stronger word than persuasion.
Tempted?
In other words, it would be the same. It's a form of coercion. Not trying to make it up now, but that seems to be it. And when you say persuaded, you have an idea that she's making a conscious decision. Pitui, I don't think is a conscious.
The point is she's resisting.
One faculty.
However much work he did to persuade her is not that important. What's important is that she wasn't open for business. She was not interested in doing this a priori. It only was because of his actions. And that's why it's called a mifateh. No, but you're right. Seduced her, he coerced her. But the point is, you don't say you coerce a prostitute. You don't coerce a prostitute. She's happily taking your money and doing this. So he's saying from the law of mifateh, we can derive that there can't be a lav. So we have a very nice, machloket rishonim of whether there's a general lav of all panuya and panuya. And on this, we need to see the Kesef Mishneh. The Andalid, the second Kesef Mishneh. There's like a very short Kesef Mishneh, and then there's Mishnatna Torah Nes Rakidesha. Oh no, sorry, that's the Magid. Sorry, Katava Rava Magid. There, we're not going to read the Rava Magid, but he's going to summarize it a little bit here. Sarah, you want to read?
Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute myself. Sure. So should I just read his little summary? Katav Harav Hamagid.
Yeah, exactly. From there.
Katav Harav Hamagid Ledat Rabbeinu V'vadai Kachi Hagirsa Pilagshim Kedushin V'lo Ktuba Ve'in Devarav Mechuvanim Shaharei Rabbeinu Atzmo Katav B'Perek Daled Michilchot Melachim Etzel HaMelech Pilagshim V'lo Ktuba V'lo Kedushin Ela B'Yichud Bilvad Koneota Umoteret Lo Aval HaHediot Asur B'Pilegesh Ela B'Ama Ivriya Bilvad Achar Yi'ud Ad Kan Lashona.
So, right. So first of all, the Rambam, so the Rambam says, first of all, that only a king can have a Pilegesh. And secondly, the definition of a Pilegesh is neither with Keduba and neither with Kiddushin. And that's not really interesting to me, whether it needs both or not. But the other point is that he does say in Hilchos Malachim that only a king can have a Pilegesh, which supports what he's saying here, kind of. If you understand that any relations that's not Kiddushin is Asur, then it would become out that it's Asur for a Hediot, it would Asur for everybody, really, it should be. That's also a question. Why does the king permit it even? But if he doesn't do Kiddushin. Okay, but go on. Ramban.
והרמב"ן בתשובה כתב, דפילגש מותרת להדיוט, שהרי דוד נשא אותה, ולא הזכיר בכתוב, ולא בגמרא, הפרש בין מלך להדיוט. ומתינו גדולי ישראל נושאים אותה, שנאמר, ויפה פילגש כליב ילדה וכולי, right? And then וגדעון שופט ישראל, שדיבר בו Hashem ktiv bo upilegesh. Elav hayta asura alav. Lo amar hakatuv vayikam isha vayelech v'ktiv vayomar avi anara el chodno v'gam hu haya mitbayesh bizimato v'od ha'arich b'davar v'od ha'arich b'davar ve'en mikol ela tshuva al rabbeinu de'ika lememar hanach pilagshim hayu amavriya.
Right, stop. Yeah, right. So what did he say? So what was the kashas of the Rambam?
So first he says, well, there's two kashas. The first is there's no obvious distinction in the Gemara between a melech and a hedyot. And so it doesn't make sense that the Rambam is making this distinction. That's the first problem. And the second problem is it seems like lots of people in the Torah have Pilegesh. And that also,
and they weren't kings.
And they weren't kings. So it must be that.
And they were Gedolim.
And they were Gedolim. They're like important people. So it seems like it's okay. Because if it were not okay, then it would have been.
Right. Only some of them were Gedolim, not all of them.
Okay, so
and then he says, well, maybe the problem, right? Like maybe the answer is like they're not really Pilegeshim like Dafka. They're actually like Amavriya.
Right, Amavriya, because the Rambam himself said.
This is a way the Tanakh talks, but it's not the technical category.
Right, because the Rambam himself says Amavriya is the only thing that is permitted, and he sort of includes it as a Pilegesh. So that's kind of the Rambam's answer. I always like. Wait, Yavni, right?
Can we then just ask the same question about the Amavriya in this, and in terms of in this context?
Well, that's permitted for a hedyot.
Right, but then what about whether she needs kiddushin and whether she?
Well, she has kiddushin. The Gemara says that like the money that the father received is a kind of kiddushin. I always like to say that you can't bring psukim against the Rambam, because the Rambam is a Rishon. He can read those psukim how he wants. He can, I can say the gates of Parshanut have not been closed. That you can't bring a kasha against the Rambam for psukim. And furthermore, for sure the Rambam didn't, he knew all the psukim, for sure. And for sure he had an explanation. So you can't bring these kashas against the Rambam. But at least you see one thing for sure, that the Ramban agrees with the Raavad. We've got now two Rishonim saying it's permitted. Okay, so go on, Sarah.
V'dasha ra'iti לרמב"ן שכתב בתשובה הנזכרת לעיל, וזה לשונו, וגם דברי הרמב"ם אינם לאסור פילגש ולהתירה למלך, אלא כך אמר, לכל הבועל אישה לשם זנות, לוקה מפני שבעל קדשה, ולשם זנות היינו שפוגע בה ובעלה, ולא יחדה לעצמו לשם פילגשות, דהיינו קדשה.
Stop. So wait. So this is already explaining our question about znut and everything. So give it a try. What is he saying?
So he's saying the Rambam isn't trying to say that Pilegesh is asur for everyone and mutar for a melech. He's just trying to tell you that anyone who has sex outside of marriage, which he thinks is nut, is...
No. Hainu, look at the keywords are hainu shepogea ba'al.
Oh, yes.
Right. That's why he added those words l'shem snut.
Right. So l'shem snut is right. So on this reading, l'shem snut is he's had sex with her, but he doesn't want her. They don't want to have some sort of monogamous relationship. That's what l'shem snut is. And Pilegeshut is like still on.
And only that is a kadesha.
Yeah.
But anything but it's not, if he's not pogea but if he specified this is my girl, then, or my woman, then it's not called kadesha. That's why I said l'shem znut. You need two things for it to be a kadesha. It has to be below kedushin and l'shem znut. That's what the Ramban is saying in the Rambam. Go ahead.
V'lo amar kol haboel v'lo kedushin lokeh. Right. He's not trying to tell you that if you have any sex outside of Kiddushin, then you're
Right.
then
That's
you're
exactly the language we wanted him to say, right? We said what? Right.
Sorry, no, yeah, he's already basically said that, right? וכן בחלקות מלאכים שהזכיר פילגשים במלך, לא הזכיר כלל שהוא היתר מיוחד לו, עד כאן לשונו. When he told you about a Pilegesh in Hilchot Melachim, he wasn't trying to tell you that it's only mutar for a melech. He's just telling you something about a Pilegesh for a melech.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now read the next line.
Okay, good. ויש לתמוה איך העביר עיניו ממה שכתב, אבל הדיוט אסור בפילגש וכולי.
In other words,
that doesn't make any sense.
Right. The Rambam himself says explicitly he's asur. Of course, you know what the Rambam, I could justify the Ramban. What could I say? Maybe he meant, exactly. Maybe the Ramban understands that Isser is just being Asur Rabbanan. And it's Asur Rabbanan, but really there's a Pilegesh. There's a concept of a Pilegesh, and that's a concept that's a Torah concept. And everybody is allowed. And when he says, but Pilegesh happens to be Asur Be'edyot for whatever rabbinic reasons there may be. That's maybe the way the Ramban understands the Rambam, if he had the Girsa that we have. But now,
yeah, well,
it is hard because the language is pretty absolute.
So the Kesef Mishneh is going to say something else. V'shema HaEzer HaEzer b'sefer shebeyado. His text didn't say that.
His text didn't say that, and which therefore leaves the Ramban where, according to the Kesef Mishneh. If his only terutz for the Ramban is, well, he must not have had the book that we have, the correct version. Therefore, where's the Ramban left, according to the Kesef Mishneh? He's left high and dry.
Not in a strong position.
Not in a strong position. He's no longer a halachic opinion. Now, as the Kesef Mishneh is saying, if once you say, oh, he didn't have the right books in front of him, well, then you're not going to take what he writes seriously at that point. In other words, that means the Kesef Mishneh is saying the Ramban is just wrong, right? Because he has the wrong book. My explanation would say, no, maybe the Ramban is right. He understands the Rambam in a unique way, and maybe that's correct. The Kesef Mishneh didn't go my way. He went the way of, he didn't have the right books. So that just means that you can't relate to what he's saying. You can't relate to the Rambam. I just finish it up.
Given what
go ahead.
Well, can I ask one question first? Just given what the Rambam, like in general, seems to think, it seems like it would be an isur deoraita for a hediot to have. If he says it's like for a hediot to have a pilegesh.
Why?
Because like in general, he seems to think that, you know,
but we just read Halacha Daled in a new way, where we said Halacha Daled means only if it's not with yichud. Only if it's not where you appointed her for yourself. Then it was a Kadesha. There's no Isser, and in fact, it's mutter. It's called a Pilegesh.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could read the Rambam. That's the way the
Rambam.
Right,
and the Isser D'Rabbanan is like, we just think that it's too messy for the hediot to be doing this, but like the melech gets special privileges or something.
Or
like
it could be that people.
Right, it's a dean of a melech.
People won't take
like it's a special dean of a melech.
Dean of the hadar of the melech.
How countries were run in that part of the world, making peace treaties or whatever.
No, I would say stronger. I would say even that if it's the king's Pilegesh, nobody will touch her. But if it's Saddam, a person's Pilegesh, they'll say, oh, she's not married to him. They didn't do Kiddushin. So now the woman will be considered available.
Like we don't think it
won't be, but where she's not really available.
Right. I mean, you could even read it as like, yeah, if she's it's not really possible for like a regular person to have someone who's like Yachda La'atzmo.
Right.
Because like it's just too messy. Like people just come along and do whatever. Like there's no.
Right. Unless it's marriage, people are not going to be intimidated. Are not going to avoid relations with this woman. But by a king, they'll be afraid of the king. And so they won't touch and even his, acquaintances, they won't touch,
Yeah.
That could be the explanation, but like, just finish up this Kesef Mishneh, then let's take a break for a few minutes.
ואם היות הרמב"ם סובר שפילגש מותרת להדיוט, כתב בסוף אותה תשובה, לשאול. לשאול, ואתה במקומך תזהר.
L'shoel, to the asker.
Oh, yes, לשואל. ואתה במקומך תזהרם מן
Tazhiram. Tell them no.
Tell them no, right? Because if they knew that this was allowed, then they would be having a lot
Yizanu
of
v'yifritzu v'yavo aleha benida. Right, because that's this whole fear of that the woman, if she's not really married, she'll be embarrassed to go to the mikveh. So what it comes out that even the Ramban seems to not be so much in favor. He's not in favor of Pilegesh, even if he thinks it's mutter. And the Kesef Mishneh seems to hold that the halacha should go like the Rambam and not like the Ramban.
Wait, Rav Nachum, is he saying they'd be embarrassed to go to the mikveh, or the problem is that the men would be having relations with women who haven't been to the mikveh, and so they're nida, and that's one of the kritut.
Yeah, the point is they won't. Well, why would they be needed? Let them go to the mikveh. So I'm trying to say they must be embarrassed to go. To
No, because he's saying that with a woman in this situation, nobody ever knows. It's like when you in a situation of man and wife, you know, and with just some random woman in the shuk, who knows? And so there's always a chance you're going to be lying with a woman in nida.
Well, maybe he's saying three things. They'll do three things.
That's how I understood when we read this. When I read this during the week, that's how I understood that.
You're right. I think you're probably right. There's three things. Yizanu, they'll do all kinds of mischief. V'yifritzu, and they'll be licentious, and they'll also do nida. They'll just everything will go haywire. So don't teach this heter. So the Ramban thinks there's a heter, but you shouldn't teach it. The Rambam thinks there's no heter, and the Kesef Mishneh, who is the Beis Yosef, thinks that the Rambam is probably correct because he thinks the Ramban misunderstood. So let's take a break for a few minutes. But
can I ask a general question? Are we to read the Kesef Mishnah as an argument for what the halacha is or should be, or are we to read him as how should we understand the Rambam?
I would say, okay, I'm sorry.
Well, Rabbi Landis was telling me a few days ago that the Kesef Mishneh was actually written after the Shulchan Aruch.
Right.
So he already paskined the halacha. He's not trying to. He's coming to tell you how to understand the Rambam, I think.
Okay.
Right. He's informed by all his years of work. When I was a kid, I was always convinced that he wrote the Kesef Mishneh first. And then he got himself going. But I saw a lot of problems with that. I was always convinced. And then he did Beis Yosef, and then he did the Shulchan Aruch. But he really did the Kesef Mishneh at the end to bring the Rambam in line.
But he'd already decided that the Rambam.
He brought the Rambam in line.
But he'd already decided that. I mean, it's one of the Shlosha Amudei Hora'ah for the Maran to codify the rules.
He certainly learned the Rambam.
You know what I mean. The Rambam is perfect as properly understood by Maran Avad Yosef. Oh, excuse me, by the Baal Shulchan Aruch. Okay, what are we doing next, Rabbi?
So we'll take a break, and then we're gonna have your tour with your Beit Yosef and your Bach for when we come back.
Bring your tour.
Bring your tour.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Olive, I think. Chavalev halacha, olive.
Okay, who's
wait? Shana I should tell everybody is very expert in this subject. So and in many subjects. So I want to hear what you have to say, Shana. I mean, I want to hear what everybody has to say, but what do you want to say now? Isuri Bia halacha Perek Kaf?
Yeah, if Isuri Bia Perek Kaf Aleph halacha Aleph. So Isuri Bia, like the name suggests, that's what he talks about. What you're not allowed to do. And yeah, I mean, your reading was helpful because here in Isha's Aleph Dalet, his focus is Kiddushin, and when you don't do Kiddushin, this is bad. And he seems to be learning it out from the pasuk of Lo Tia. The Isur of premarital sex, I guess, is Lo Tia Kadesha. And Alana made a good point on the chat that the focus was the shame is Hutanut. And that's what makes you get malka, lashes from the Torah. And you violate this pasuk of Lo Tia Kadesh. I mean, I assume that's the pasuk when he says, meaning so you violate the pasuk Lo Tia Kadesha Israel, and you get lashes. So in Surah Parashah Aleph.
Wait, you were saying Aleph?
So in Isura Bia, so I just mentioned Ishus is what we just read, Parakal Halacha Dal. So that's what we were just discussing. But then if you look in Isura Bia, Parachaf Aleph Halacha Aleph. So I was trying to see, and this Isura Bia is where he talks about. I mean, Ishus is really about the laws of marriage. Isur Bia is about the thing, everything that's not allowed.
This in Aleph, he talks about holding hands and other parts of the body.
Right, but he also says,
but it's maybe Lidei Gilia.
Right, but Kol Haba al
Not the thing itself. It's not the thing itself.
But
just another Isser.
But it's Mina.
No, that's just why isn't it just another Isser? You get
right. Is it another Isser? But he also says Loka Min HaTorah.
Yeah, you get two. You get whipped twice. You're gonna get whipped for
would you get whipped twice?
You get whipped.
But he also says L'kol haba al ha'erba min ha'arayot.
Yeah, but I don't see what that proves.
Wait, I don't understand the question.
Derech Evorim. In other words, it's one level. It's messing around.
So he's saying there's two separate Isurei Deoraita.
But yes.
And
I just wonder why he didn't bring.
Wait. In Kaf Aleph, isn't he talking about like for forbidden relations, not stams?
Yeah, this is erva in the sense.
Yeah.
This is
so why
if you have relations with a stam penuya, you get only kadesha. But if the stam penuya is your sister or your brother, then it's then you get twice.
This is even a nida. Right. I mean, if someone,
but a penuya doesn't have to be a nida. A penuya doesn't have to be a nida.
No, right. But
this is
you would make it an araya.
What do you?
Any araya. Yeah, I'm just giving an example.
Yeah, I understand, but it's a din of kirva.
Right.
What's going on? It's a separate Isur. It's a Isur of we didn't go all the way. Well, fine. Lo tikravu.
And this doesn't even have to be
just going to second base or third base.
Even,
I can't remember my old language.
Right. No, even just holding hands for the Rambam would be an Isur, would be before. I mean,
but that's only for Anita or for sisters, for close family members.
Yeah, for the arayat.
Right.
But Anita, I mean, so a couple before they get married, assuming she hasn't gone to the mikvah. So the difference between this,
do you? That's a leap, right? Wasn't Nachum saying that you don't assume that Pnuya has Anita?
No, we do. A girl who's once she's reached.
No, she could be 12.
Age, we do assume.
Yeah, but assuming is very different from we're talking in
meaning
theoretical
not
terms.
That they need it at the moment.
I don't think you would. We're talking about. I mean, I think it's very clear. The Rambam is making a separate halacha here, which is an erva, nothing to do with kadesha. Even if you marry an erva, even if you kedushin are not tofsin by a erva.
This is a very good segue.
Okay.
To the Torah. Let's go to the Torah. Well, you can come back to this. This is a very good point. Good points were made. So I would just say, as we look at Chav Vav Aleph in the Torah, the superimposed Aleph, great thing, of course, about the Torah is you see all the scenes in the discussion. Then the Beis Yosef is going to process his thinking regarding that. When we saw the Kesef Mishneh, we saw a concluded set of thinking, but here he kind of processes it. So first we'll start on the Torah, and I'm going to read because there's not too much time. At least I'll start, maybe I'll continue. Ein ha'isha nachshavas eishes ish el yadei kedushin. Shenit kadsha k'ra'oi, proper kedushin. Avalim ba'alei adam below kedushin, l'shem zinus, we have those expressions again. Loka mishum lotia kadesha. The hizona ha'amura b'torah, amura b'torah, is we're going to figure that one out. We have the Iser lab of lotia kadesha. And then we have the status of being a zona. If he's got the right kavana, right? He's got the right kavana, but it's beino lebeina and nechshavski. So I feel im yachda, even if he selected her. So yichud below kiddushin doesn't do us anything. El adra kofil sahotzia mi beso. Based in forces him to go, to leave. Maybe we'll just stop it there and look with you in the Beis Yosef. Okay, any
No, skip to the second Beis Yosef. We did that one.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I was just going to review it. Okay, fine. Masha Kosuv Rabbeinu. The hizonah murah b'torah. What does that really mean? L'chayra mashma dehanuk Rav Elazar. We have three shitas there in Yevamos. The Amar Soper, I'm sorry, yeah, that's Soper Kabal Yevemto. Ponui haba penuya. Rav Elazar says shalol l'shem issues. Anything that's not l'shem issues. As with a mapic hey right there. Asa zona. She is made into a zona at that point. The Tema, to Halo Kaimalon Kabase. We don't go like him that this act of Ponui and Penuya is who we pass to Rabbi Elazar. Below Rabbi Akiva, who actually demands more, even not like Rabbi Akiva, who demands more than Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar demands one-time act, but not Loka Rabbi Akiva, Dalmar Hasam, Zanazu Mufkeras. Ella, but who do we pass? Like a Chachami Damri, Ein Zona, Ella, what's a zona? Now we're going to the definition of zona. Ein Zona, Ella Gioras, Umushuchreras, Shenival, that was under captivity, Ushenivala Bilas Zenus, who had a Bila of Zenus. What's a Bila of Zenus? Komar, Sheniv Allah Litzol La, a Bia that passes her. Makes her what would be a term in English? Makes her invalid for a kohen. Kagon echad mikol arayos, or could also just be a regular bas Yisrael in the team. That is a relationship that is definitionally wrong. Umams in that case of arayos. V'chein pasak Rambam perek yachach be'isur bia. Shabal penuya afil ha'isa kedesha hefkira asma l'chol, that she's she's open to all in terms of her work. Lo nasik zona. She's not in that definition. Zona has, according to this, has a very specific definition. It's a definition of someone who's pasula, because a woman who's pasula because she had a relationship which was definitionally usher and invalidates her for a kohen. And that is not, but this case, but a penuya I feel I'm just repeating the line before. I feel she could marry a Kohen. The Kachem Diva Rabbeinu Atzmo, and therefore Besiman Vav, the Torah himself says Siman Vav. Nearly, basically speaking, Shema Shenemar Kan Rabbeinu, because there's a problem here. The Hizonah. It contradicts what we see in the Gemara. It contradicts what he himself says in Siman Vav, that the definition, that Zona has a specific definition as relates to a relationship that creates a psul on marrying a Kohen. That's what a Zona is. So here he's talking about, if there's not Kiddushin, there's a Zona, there's even a Panui and a Panuya. What does that got to do? The nearly Shemash Amar Kan Rabbeinu. So here what the Torah says, quote, the He Zonah HaMurah b'Torah. This is Zona that's stated in the Torah. Lav l'meira d'zu He Zona HaMurah b'Torah l'Asra l'Kohen. It's not the Zona of the din of Kohen. Elomar, very specifically, shenikret Zona. She has the name of Zona. Kakatub, how do we know that? Kakatub Kadashkan B'Tamar. Zinsa Tamar Kalatech. When they bring back to Judah and they say to him, your daughter-in-law did Zinus. The Gamhine Hara was Zinunim, and she's pregnant from that act. Afal God, even though Penuya Haisa, because her husbands were dead, first one, second one, both of them are dead. Kori Lezona, and I'm emphasizing, Kori Lezona, she's called a Zona. Now in kind of a parenthesis, some might want to say there's a reason why she's called a Zona. Then some way she is a Shomeret Yavam, that she's already married to the third son or a son on his way, something like that. She was considered that way. Because you're putting in halachah that didn't exist. I feel and if you say there was a minhag of yibum before Matan Torah, can a mashma be received bo al eshet achecha v'yabemota? If you say that, become a come. Lo ha'isa katub korekt b'shem zona kaven dadayin lo mitzvah Torah. Elad, that's not for that there is two dinim, or I'm talking brisk now, that there's two zonot. There's two zonas. Elad mishum da'afil biat penuya mikre zenus. And there that this is a zenus type action. The inyan hashem belvad. You got an honorific title of Zona. Shenikret Zona inyan hashem belvad. The question is, what's the difference between the two? One is the din of Kohen, who's usher to a Kohen, etc. What's this other notion? Shem zenus. Nikret, it's a castigation. It's saying it's a bad thing. It's saying that it's an act of zima. It's an act that we don't like.
Yeah.
Thank you. Aval, so she's nikret zona. Aval the Indian zona of surah kohen, and zona repeats himself. El gioris mishachreris, or a bas Yisrael, who is with a mamzer and a team. Ukedivrei chachamim, and so we go like the chacham. Be'ezei alfusa ha'yisrael shrimena lamdu shezona ha'umura b'kohen eina kazona degabe tahar. You guys not sure of the full complete learning. The question is, what is the difference in impact in the case of zona regarding kohen? If that's the result of very specific relationships of arayot, that zona means she can't marry a kohen. We know that's specific. What does it mean? Nikret zona, bilvad. She's only called, that's all that she has. So I think there is no necessary, unless you find it for me, maybe you will. There's no necessary penalty except acquiring that name of being of Zanus.
No, there's still,
Well,
I would argue that
yeah.
there's still, I would argue that there, he's just saying it's called a znud. It's not going to puzzle her from a Kohen, but it still has the lav of Lotia Kadesha.
Yes, sorry. It has a lav of Lo Tzachalel or a lav of Kadesha. No, here it says Kadesha. Lotia Kadesha. There's a lav of Kadesha. So, right. So yeah, okay. So we're going to see a little bit further in a moment. We take a look at the Bach. Umasha Amar Bafil Lo Ba'alev L'Shem Znus El L'Shem Ishus Eina Nechsheves Keishto Sepashu V'Dayak L'Kosuv Beino V'Dayak L'Chtov Beino Uveina She'ilo Haya B'Fnei Eitim Kevin L'Shem Ishus Bala Havile Nekadesh. Then the private act, which is never valid, then would be a public act, and assuming the two of them are in concert, then then that would be marriage. Now, what I like to do is spend a couple of minutes, go to the Bach, and see what the Bach summarizes or goes through the Beis Yosef in a certain sense, but then he adds some other distinctions which are very important. But what we have right here is two the din of Zonah, that makes Isurim and status, and the shame Zonah, which comes from being over the Isur lot. And those are the two. But he doesn't mention Malkos here. He doesn't say anything about that. I'm just pointing that out. That's why maybe that. Now, and one of the I just will say in terms of derivation, this became very influential in Brisker Torah, when they often try to distinguish by when something has a shame, when something has the din, has actual import, and things have the shame, which doesn't that. And I was overly taken in by that, but nonetheless, I think that's important. Now let's take a look at the Bach. Ena Isha, right? He's on Nahamura. Okay, he is on Nahamura Torah.
Do you want someone to read?
Do I want someone to read? No, because I want to get through it.
Lexi will read it
just
fast.
for a few minutes. Who? What?
Lexi will read it fast.
Faster than me. Okay, Lexi. Could you read Kesef Beis Yosef? Make the rabbi happy. Kesef Beis Yosef.
Sure. Kesef Beis Yosef, Lechor Mashma, Zayinu, Pilegesh, Amar, Besof Perek, Habal Yevamto, right? Habal Yevama. Panui Haba Al Pniyah, Lo L'Shem Yishut, Azona. So it seems the Beis Yosef, the thing, the in HaEzer v'Hizur Naham Torah, this thing that we see in the Torah, the Beis Yosef wrote that it seems like this is in accordance with the Rabbi Eliezer opinion that we got, which said that just like non-married people having sex not for L'Shem Yishut, that's the zonah that we see in the Torah.
And that's a
Halo Kaimalan.
Yeah. The Tema.
Right, it's Lahava. That's to be what this is written in accordance with. But that's surprising because we don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer. Ve'lo Rabbi Akiva, Amar Hatam Zonah Zamufkeret. And we don't even hold like Rabbi Akiva to say that a zonah that was written in the Torah is a prostitute essentially. So we hold like a Chachamim who say that the only person who has a zonah, at least vis-a-vis the kahuna, is somebody who had sex with one of the forbidden relationships. Fine. So this is all from the Beis Yosef. V'chein pasak Rabbeinu la'aya b'zman vav v'kan. So that was all the Beis Yosef. V'lo kasha midi. Devadai da'afal gav delo kaimalan k'Rabbi Eliezer depanui haba apniyah asa zona v'asra l'kohen mekom makom lav ika. V'im min haTorah hayta muteret Heicha Amar Rabbi Eliezer D'Mikra Zona. So the Bach says this kushia that Beit Yosef raised is not a kushia at all. Even though we don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer that she's a zona vis-a-vis being pasal the kahuna, if this like panui habal panuya was mutar min Torah, how could Rabbi Eliezer say that she is a zona?
So what's his proof is what? That since Rabbi Eliezer says it's forbidden, everybody must agree that it's a lav, and it's just a question of whether it's called a zona. Because Rabbi Eliezer, he would only call it a zona if there was a lav there.
No, but Rabbi Eliezer would say, again, we're not sure yet, right? We haven't decided. I mean, now he's going to decide. We're not sure like who we're passing. If we go like Rabbi Eliezer, he would say that's zona mamash. In other words, he doesn't have two dinim.
He says like this:
Rabbi Eliezer does not have two dinim of zona.
No, but how do you explain the imin haTorah hayta muteret heichi amar Rabbi Eliezer d'mikri zona?
Yeah. No. Okay.
What does that mean?
Basically, trying to argue that if he thinks it falls under this lav, but I just think it's a weak argument. Like it totally could be plausible that Rabbi Eliezer could think that this is specifically the lav of.
But leaving your opinion aside, what does he say?
And other people could say that it's not a doraita lav.
But what is he saying?
We just read it. That he says the Bach says that even if we don't hold the Eliezer for status, if this was really Mutanya Torah, how could there even be like essentially this opinion that she would be the? I don't know. I don't think it's great logic, but that's.
But let's explain it. Then
let's continue his line of thought here, which is.
Don't just dismiss it. We can't dismiss it.
He's looking very.
No, I'm not just dismissing it. I'm saying I can continue the end of this section, which he expands on slightly.
Let's go on. But mikre zona becomes the words.
The mikre zona.
He called mikre, taking that very literally. Mikre zona.
Yes. The Mishneh. Rosh Perek something.
Hilchos Ishus. Rosh Perek Aleph Hilchos Ishus.
Right. And Hilchos Ishut. V'chein katav hasmag b'lavin. Shuto shel mikra delot tiyeh kedesha. Isha hanivelet l'shem znut v'lo kiddushin kamo hakdesha shenichtava b'inyan Yehuda v'tamar v'chulei.
What does he add here?
That I think he's like, okay, he adds in the idea, I mean, this is related to other stuff we've read, but that basically there is the zona that is the lav vis-a-vis like being pasal kahuna, and then there's the lav of like lotia kadesha. And that can refer to somebody who is having sex, lav l'shem kiddushin, and that this also relates to where we see Tamar being called a zona, and he's like, look, the like shot of the pasuk there is that she's a zona. And
how do you understand the mikra yotzei b'dei shuto here?
That I think he thinks that we shouldn't be trying. I think he disagrees with the Beit Yosef's treatment of the way we talk about Tamar, that the Beit Yosef is like, look, we're using this like colloquially, but we don't actually think that there's like a particularly like status stafka that she has that's relevant to at least our lavin. And he's like, no, it calls her a zona. We use the language of zona that actually is related to like lavin.
Yeah, but it could very, so therefore it could very well mean that yes, she is a zona, except that she's a different zona than the other zona. She's not the zona of the Easter.
Basically, this zona means Kadesha.
Right.
But then how is it different than the Beit Yosef? Like, what's the Nafka mean? Even the Beit Yosef said, okay, so she's a zona, not the kind that's puzzled to a Kohen.
I think the main thing is that the Bach is just spelling out clearly that it's
it's
a lav.
Well, I don't think the Beit Yosef necessarily thinks that it's a lav min Torah, whereas the Bach very clearly thinks it's a lav min Torah.
Okay, I wouldn't say that. I would say more or less what Nachum said. And the only reason why I'm reading it is also to make sure that it's all clear. But I like to say that we got to take it very seriously that there's a status of zona even when there's not the activity which leads to an Easter Kohen. And therefore, when it says I read it as saying is that's the zona, except it's only the shame of zona.
I also
In other
think
words,
that
I
we
like
should
the
just-
fact that he added those words to it. But
I
do the
just think-
contra sacra. I'm sorry. Go
Can I
ahead.
just like a
please.
quick comment on that? I think that like even if we're using the Yehuda and Tamar thing, I don't think that we can use that as proof of the way that we relate to like any case of hapunui haba pnuya, because like that's a case of like someone who's paying for sex. Like this is like clearly this isn't a scenario of like people who happen to be single and are not having sex. Dafka l'shem kiddushin.
Well, what it does show. So the pushback would be is that there is a zone. All it's showing is that there is the term zona when it's not used in terms of Iser Kahuna. There is.
I wonder if you could also,
say
They
that
are
there's-
different.
that
They
it's
are
for like the
different,
mufkeret.
but there
You could
is-
say that that's the example of the mufkeret.
Isn't it the
Well,
opposite? Because it's the example of Eshet Ish. Isn't the Shomeret Yavam that we kind of dismissed a few minutes ago exactly the point that she is halachically still have zikah to the family and is not
I
a
mean-
pnuya in any relevant sense? Or-
Well,
well,
clearly that argument is there, and therefore you needed to dismiss it. I think it's that between the Beis Yosef and the Bach's redoing of the Beis Yosef, or just retelling of the Beis Yosef, is just to make sure that we have what is shame zona? It has the shame of zona. That's not such an easy concept. In other words, a din of zona we understand. We might think a din of zona, like in the case of Cohen, leads to the term zona. To have the shame and not to have that particular din is kind of interesting. We didn't have that before. I think this is a process of thinking it through.
Yeah, I
And
also
therefore,
don't
what
think
he's saying here is that's what we need and nothing more than that. And I know there's a difference between these cases, but that's actually the point. The point is that you can have the term zanus refer to several cases, in several situations. You can have the shame. Sometimes you have the shame along with the din, which is obviously easy. And sometimes you have the shame alone, which is I think Masha, it's just saying negative of zima. Zanut or zima. What do you have, Yavni?
Also, I thought I remembered someone bringing this up, but I can't find it. What about the fact that, like, in the story, not only is she called a zona, but as a result of being a zona, she's brought out to be killed?
yeah, if you take the logic of the Beit Yosef and you think about that, you're going to come up with the fact that she's a panuya who had relations with another panui, and she's going to be burnt for it, which doesn't really fit
well,
the
no,
Torah
if it was
law.
Yibum, she wasn't a Panuya. She was
No,
still
that's the Beis
Nikudesh to
Yosef.
the youngest
I
son.
don't.
I know,
Well,
Beis
yeah,
Yosef rejects
that
that.
could be
I
the
said
We don't
specifically,
think
I said
Yehuda-
specifically, according to the Beit Yosef, she's not.
But the irony is, she was actually not. Yudo did what he did l'shem znut. She dafka didn't. She was trying to force the Yibum to happen. She was actually
But
doing
according-
l'shem
right.
kiddushin.
But in any event, according to the Beit Yosef, it is a panui and a panuya. And yet,
So now
it becomes, that's
now we go to Contra Sachra. Read the Contra Sachra. Andre, read the Contra Sachra. You have it there in front of you?
it was the next Beit Yosef,
Andre.
the next Bach, the next Bach.
אין נחשבת אשת איש, אלא על ידי קידושין, אבל בלא קידושין אינה אלא זונה. ובין הראשון,
Eina
Shabbat.
Elazona. I'm sorry, that's right. Uvein.
ובין הראשון שבא עליה ובין הראשון שבא עליה ובין השני והשלישי, כולם לוקין משום לא תהיה קדשה. דכך הוא פשוטו של מקרא, דלא תהיה קדשה. פירוש זונה ועליה לוקין, אבל הבא על
All right, stop
השפחה
there. No,
לשם
stop.
זנות,
Stop,
אפילו...
stop. Andre, stop there. No, just hold it there. So fine, now we see a consequence. By having the shame zona, which equals Perush, zona, by having that, that's an Easter lav. Now we know things. There's an Easter lav, and the Easter lav is on anybody who involves themselves with Kadesha. They get whipped. 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. Now he's going to go Abba Haba. We're creating the categories. Go ahead. Abba Haba. Andres, continue.
אוקיי, אבל הבא על השפחה לשם זנות אפילו באו עליה 3 או 4 ויותר, והיא מופקרת אין בה מלכות. וכל מה שכתב רבנו לעיל,
why is there no malchus? Because it's a din of Yisraelis, right? Right? Lotia Kadesha, right? You have to have a Kadesha within the Israelite people. Ukamosha Katuv Rabbeinu Lael.
This is a Shifcha Kanani. You're exactly.
Right, she's a Shifcha Kananit.
וכל מה שכתב רבנו לעיל, סוף סימן תז, בש"ס, הרמב"ם.
בשם הרמב"ם.
בשם הרמב"ם, ואף על פי ש...
דרשו רבנו.
דרשו רצ"ל, שבשפחה ועבד דעוברים הלא תהיה קדשה והלא יהיה קדש, וכמו שתרגם אונקלוס, אין זה פשוטו של מקרא, ועיקר עליו, ללקוט עליו, אינו אלא בבעל ישראלית לשם זנות.
In other words, there's a shita out there. It also involves a shifcha, the shifcha Kanani. She's on her way to being fully Jewish. She is partially Jewish. And Ebed Kanani is also partially Jewish. But he wants to make the point here that it's separate. Okay, he doesn't bring that many proofs.
ואפילו ירדה לו בינו לבינה, ואפילו איכה על אשת, אין אחד חשיב כמו בינה לבינה, ואין אחד לאו כלום הוא, וכל ביותיו חשובות ביד זנות, כיוון דלא קידשה בעדין, וכופין אותו להוציא, ודלא כמו שפירש.
Okay, so that's where you can. So in other words, the halachas we're seeing is that it's with the Israelis. It's a shame zona. It's a shame zona because there's an Easter lav.
And even where
every bia has that. Because and what he's adding in, what type of kiddushin do you need? You need a full kiddushin.
Can I, Rabbi Landis, can I jump in here and go to the Shulchan Aruch?
I think one thing that I would say though, before you do that, towards the end of that section, Elahachi Kamar Hakadesha Hi Azona Mura B'Torah, Wafi Pishuto, Dahainu Shemechina Atzma L'Zunut. That would become that definition. V'afalpi Da'ein Zonanzu Asurawi Nosel Kohen, because she didn't have a relationship with someone who's definitionally Asura, who would be Pasler. Okay, go ahead.
I want to just jump to the Shulchan Aruch.
Good idea.
And because I want to also see the Beit Shmuel on this. Not sorry, the Beit Shmuel or the Chelkat Machloket. Wait a second.
Beit Shmuel.
Wait,
But the Chelkat Mechokek also talks about it, but you assigned Beit Shmuel.
I assigned the Beit Shmuel. So let's hope I was right. He mentions the Bach, right? Does he mention the Bach?
I think they both do.
Well, I think I want to look at the Helkat Mechokek. So let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. Ein ha'isha nechshevet eshet isa ela al yedei kiddushin shenitkadsha kira'ui, aval im ba'a leha derech znut shelo l'shem kiddushin eino klum va'afilu ba'a leha l'shem ishut beino levein atzmo eino nechshevet ki'ish tov va'afilu im yicheda lo ela adarabba kofin oto l'hotzi'a mebeito. Okay.
He
Vaga.
adds the words derech sanut. He can have l'shem kedushin, but if it's derech sanut, because it's not kedushin karaui.
Well, he says shelo l'shem kiddushin. It sounds like if it's not l'shem kiddushin, it's derech znut.
Right.
That is, he's defining it. Shebala
No,
derech
but the second
znut.
part, the field ball l'shem.
Va'afilu ba'al l'shem issues beino levein atzmo. It's not enough to do it privately. Even if you're trying to marry, you have to do it publicly.
Right.
And then in the Ramah he says, "Ubevadai bosha hi milit bol." She for sure won't go to the mikveh, and that seems to be the reason why you are hotzi oto mibeito. Uba aleha benidata. Aval im yached alav isha v'tovel et alav. If she's specific for him and she goes to the mikveh, yesh omrim demuter. Who is that Yeshomrim? We know it's the Raavad and maybe the Ramban. Who Pilegesh Amur Torah? The Yeshomrim Shasur. The Lokalze. Mishum Lot Yekdesha. And there are those that say it's us. So there's two opinions. Harambam Varosh Vatur. Okay, so on that, let's look at the Chelkat. I think it's the Chelkat Mechokek. Anyway, it's shorter, so it's maybe better for right now because we don't have so much time. So he says, Yeshom Rimsha Asur v'lokin al zeh mishum lo tiye kedesha. So on that opinion that says it's a kedesha, the Chelkat Mechokek comes along and says, Medivrei harosh v'atur lo mashma shehi asura sheyeh isur bepilegesh. He says, I don't see that the Tur nor the Rosh, I don't see them saying that a Pilegesh is Asur. Rak Pagam Mishpacha. It's just a Pagam in the Mishpacha. I don't know if we read that. We didn't actually get here yet in the Tur. But I still want to read this because of what he's going to mention about the Bach. Ve'eder Kavod. It's just sort of like embarrassing to be with a Pilegesh. Ve'ilu haya ba lav, if there was a lav, lo tiye kedesha haya mutal al beit din lechof al zeh. If there would be a lav, then the Beis Din would have to separate them, which we are only saying they have to separate because of nida, but not because of this lav of kedesha. Umali isur nida shehi bekaret. Umali isur kadesha. That's a lav. Either way, it's usur hava deraita. So why would we separate only because of nida? V'gam divrei Rambam eno mashma sheyeh malkot bepilegesh hamiyuchedet leish echad. And also in the Rambam, it doesn't seem like there is malkot. Now there's maybe usur, but maybe you don't get whipping. The hakatav call a boil isha l'shem znut below kiddushin loke. Mashma de miyuchedet. But if it's not l'shem znut, if it's miyuchedet lo l'shem ishus af below kiddushin, even though you didn't have kiddushin, ein va lav l'kol hapachot. There's no lav at all. Ubehilchot malachim lo katav rak aval hediot asur b'pilegesh. It just says there that a pilegesh is asur for a regular person. He never said that you get whipped for it. So he's saying at worst it's some kind of rabbinic or probably rabbinic prohibition. But he said so so actually, this is not what I wanted you to see. So I did want to see the Beit Shmuel, but here he's just saying that as far as he's concerned, the Rambam is saying it's only as a Rabbanat, and the Rosh and the Tur are actually not saying that it's Asur. Actually, you know what? We're out of time, so next time we'll continue again in this same topic. The next Beit, the Beit Shmuel, and the rest of.
is good because he addresses the Bach.
Yeah, he addresses the Bach. I wanted exactly. He addresses the Bach. I wanted to see the counter to the Bach. Maybe do we have a minute to see this? I can jump into where he says the Bach. Let's see. Where does he say the Bach?
Yeah,
it's like 2/3 of the way through.
Thank you. Wait, where is it? Agam Mashevin. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So let's read that. So the Bach, what did the Bach say? But we didn't read the Bach yet. You know what? I take it back. We didn't read the right Bach yet. So we're not there yet. We didn't really read the right Bach yet. He doesn't relate to the Bach that we saw. So we'll have to wait for next time. We have to see the next Bach and then that Beit Shmuel. So really, the only thing I showed you is that there is a pushback against already in the Helkat Machoke, that against this opinion that it's Isser D'Oraita. And that's what I was discussing this with Lexi, and I think the correct thing to say is that in the early opinions, like the Tur and the Rambam and the Kesef and even the Beit Yosef, there seems to be opinion that it is Isser D'Oraita. But in the later commentaries, 15th century, 1500s, there seems to be a push away from that. So I would say that the position sort of is still left as a dispute, kind of among the earlier comment, maybe the Rishonim almost between the Rishonim and the Achronim. But we're going to have to leave the rest of the Bach. There's another Bach where he brings an argument that about how the Rosh holds, and then the Beit Shmuel goes against how the argument of the Bach. But we don't have time for that today.
Could it be, everyone can leave, sorry, but a machloket between the Spanish and the Ashkenazim is actually like in Spain and in that milieu, apparently Pilegesh was a very big issue, and many Jewish men.
But a lot of the Spanish ones are the ones who say it's totally mutar, like Raavad and Ramban. And
Raavad isn't really. He's more not necessarily Spain. The Ram. Right. The Ram.
I mean,
Raavad isn't.
Raavad, the Ramban, and the Rashba are all like Catalonia.
They're more Provence. I mean, a little more both, but
no, they're not.
Raavad is French, he's not Spanish.
Right. I know in Spain at some point there was a great proliferation of Pilegesh, so I wonder if they're responding to that reality. I'll send you an article about
against it or in favor of it.
Against, I mean, people were doing it and they were against it. So
yeah.
So I wonder if they're responding to reality where people do, or is in the.
In other words, even the Ramban, who is in favor of it, isn't in favor of it practically. Maybe he would be more against it if it was going on.
I wonder. That's like just a complete conjecture.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The case that it was going on in medieval.
But there was a difference in Spain. You had
Muslim
northern Spain was different from southern Spain.
You need Pilegesh to be legal. At the same time, you may want to get rid of the concept of get rid of it. Those are two contradictory notions that happen, because what are you going to do for the people that can't have that binary situation of either Kiddushin Kiroi or Zanut, and there's nothing in between. So there's always a push for it. On the other hand, monogamy has its own force.
I think it's an interesting point, though, that where a phenomena does not exist, you're easier to permit it. It's easier to be permissive. When it, in other words, if it's where it exists, then you see the problems of it, and you maybe want to restrict it more, which is kind of paradoxical.
Well, it's not happening. You don't have an issue with it. But
Right,
let me
exactly. If
find-
it's not happening, you don't have an issue, so you don't need to forbid it. Okay, so we have still more to do on this fascinating topic, but we still are interested in doing Kaf Zion, so we're going to make progress also. Thank you, guys, everybody.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Laila Tov. Shkoch.
All right. Laila Tov.
Hello, bye.